Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast, where we talk about all things eternal with a primary focus on limited play. I am one of your hosts, Jedi, and with me, as always, is Valkyrie. How you doing, Valkyrie?
Hey, everyone.
So, we are going to jump right into it today. We want to start off with the basics. So our first episode is going to be really simple, and we're going to focus on the primary colors of Eternal. Each color has certain characteristics and traits and strategies that go into it based on what colors you pair and things like that. So we're going to break this up essentially into a 3-part episode. This first one will be just the primary colors, and then episode 2 we're going to have 5 of the 2 color pairs, and episode 3 we will finish off with the other 5 color pairs. All right. So we're going to go ahead and real quick before we jump into it, let's mention our Patreon, patreon.com/EJ the podcast. This is where you can support the show directly. Val, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we're going to have multiple tiers on our Patreon. You can pledge as little as $1 or as much as, honestly, you can pledge whatever you want. It just helps support what we're doing, gets us better equipment, maybe lets us buy some in-game content to show you guys in the future. We're going to be focusing mostly on free-to-play, but that would give us options for the future. So check us out.
Yeah, mainly what Valkyrie was talking about was the fact that we're going to try not to spend money on the game, just because that's what I feel like the majority of the listeners of the show will be at. But obviously, it takes some time to generate income on the game, so we can purchase more drafts, more sealeds, and more forges for y'all to watch. And so because we both have daytime jobs and nighttime jobs and stuff like that, this kind of helps us just produce more content and better content. And like we said in our initial episode, we'd like to eventually get people on the show for interviews, professional players, maybe even some people that work for Direwolf. So that may or may not cost a little bit of money. Just something to consider. So thank you once again for everyone that considers supporting the show. All right, well, let's dive right into our main topic, which, like I said, is the primary colors. I'm going to kick it off with fire, which is the red color. Okay, and right off the bat, it is a very aggressive color. You are focusing, or you're going to see a lot of creatures with high attack value and low health. So one of the primary things you'll see is like Audacious Bandit, which is a 4 power, 4 cost, and it's 4 attack and 2 health. With Spark, it gets quick draw, and Spark means when your opponent has taken damage this turn, you get a bonus. So this kind of incentivizes you to turn your creature or units into attack mode and keep pounding your opponent into the face. A major snowball kind of effect or trigger for the color is Warcry, which means when a creature or a unit, sometimes my magic background will come out. When a unit attacks, if it has Warcry 1, 2, or 3, etc., the next card in your deck, whether it be a unit or a weapon, will get a +X equal to the Warcry. So it really incentivizes you to stay aggressive and keep putting your opponent on the back foot. Like I said, expect a lot of units to have more attack and kind of be slightly fragile, because you just want to have the best defense is a good offense type mentality. Another type of strategy that Red promotes is the go wide strategies. You see this with a lot of aggressively costed low power creatures. Things like 1-drops and 2-drops kind of are plethora with more attack yet again. So you're kind of getting a little more bang for your buck. A lot is the Grenadins. They seem to have a really multiplying effect. There's various cards, much like Grenadin Drone, which it's a 1/1 by itself, and then as soon as it comes into play and you summon it, it creates another 1/1. So you're getting the same amount of power you would in most other colors, except you're getting it across 2 different bodies. What this means is there's other cards that make 3 Grenadins and things like that, where you're worried a little less about having big beefy units to attack your opponent, and instead spreading them out across the board as wide as you can, and then kind of getting your incremental damage there. Another kind of synergistic part of this, both with the Grenadins as well as going wide, is your Disassembler, which it pretty much is just a 2/2, but it has the added ability of anytime a unit dies, deals 1 damage. So what this means is, let's say you have your Grenadin drone, you make 2 1/1s and you attack. Your opponent may or may not block, and if they do, they decide, okay, I don't want to take the 1 damage, or let's say you pump them so they're 2 1s. The damage they'll block. They may or may not lose their creature, but they're still going to take 1 damage from the assembler, this disassembler. And this actually kind of stacks up, especially when you're on the aggressive foot and you kind of start dwindling your opponent's life down. So that's something to consider. Another good part of red is weapon synergies. You have cards like Ani Quartermaster, which is a 2/2 at 3 power, and it's a little high costed. Obviously, you can get the 2/2 for 2, but the thing is, it has the added ability is anytime you play a weapon spell, whether it's on the Quartermaster or another creature, you get to draw a card. So it gives you the ability of replacing the weapon that you cast. You cast a weapon on one of your other creatures, it triggers, you get to draw a card, so you replace that effect, but your creature is going to be that much stronger or your unit is going to be that much stronger for it. There's other synergies as well, where you have creatures that when they are carrying a weapon, they get certain bonuses of themselves in addition to the bonus that the weapon gives them. So that is something to consider when you are building decks and looking at red or fire. And lastly is the removal. I tend to value removal quite highly in limited, just because of the fact that you want to kill your opponent, but a part of you also wants to make sure you can stop them from killing you. And removal is the way you do that. You take out their key creatures, such as, for example, if they have the Quartermaster on their side, you want to kill that because chances are they're not going to let it get into combat. Or if they have just a major bomb, like a huge creature you can handle, removing it from the game is going to increase your chances of winning. So the thing about fire, though, is they have damage-based removal. What this means is that instead of it saying kill a creature or unit or send a unit to the void and things like that, it's going to deal damage. A prime example and a key point is Torch. Torch is a 1 power spell, fast spell, that deals 3 damage. The versatility of this card is because it deals damage, instead of just killing a unit, you have the option of also going to an opponent's face or to their own life total. What this does is it gives red or fire reach. What I mean by reach is, let's say you get in early, you go wide, you make a bunch of 1/1s, you're getting in there for some damage, and then it turns out that they ended up casting a bunch of larger creatures that you just can't get through. Well, sending in your creatures you're roadblocked, right? Having things like Torch and Obliterate, which is another fast spell or another spell that does 6 damage, lets you go over the top of their units and hit them directly to finish them off. One thing to consider, though, the downside to this is that what you can kill as far as units go is limited by the amount of damage that those spells can do, i.e. Torch can only kill something with 3 health and below. Now you can combo off with things like going into combat, having a 2/2 hit their 5/5, and then finishing it off with Torch. But you're essentially sometimes 2 for 1ing yourself. It just depends. So that is the downside of having damage-based removal. You have the versatility of being able to go to the face, but you may or may not be able to kill everything that you want to. And that is kind of primarily that kind of sums up fire for right now. Obviously, it does other synergies and traits when you pair it with other colors, but that is the primary stuff you're looking at when you're looking at fire. Valkyrie, you want to go ahead and discuss time?
Sure. So time, yellow or gold. This color deals a lot in deadly units. So we have our Vipers, Sand Viper, our Scorpion Wasp, our Scorpion Traps. You can bestow deadly on another unit with Viper's Bite. So even though there are not a lot of removal options for time, there are definitely some good defenses. Also, one of my favorite effects is Echo. So we have a bunch of Echo units in time. What this does is if you draw a card with Echo, you get basically a twin of that card.
The cool thing about Echo is that from what I've gathered from the casting costs or the prices of these spells is they're actually not taking into consideration that you're getting 2 for the spell in most cases. I actually feel like they're a little undercosted for the fact that you're getting 2 cards for the 1 slot in your deck, which is essentially card advantage.
Yeah, Echo effect, it pairs really nicely with creatures like your Nesting Avasaur and Excavate, which basically you can take that card, put it back on top of your deck, redraw it, sometimes giving it a +1/+1. So you're basically just generating more and more cards. I also like it because I feel like I'm just getting 2 creatures for 1, so I can just keep throwing them out there as chump blockers, like that Teriax Hatchling. It's a 2/1, not super great defense, but if I need a chump blocker, I know I have 2 of them. We also have a lot of high power units in Time, so all the dinosaurs, some of which do have Echo as well. So we have our Twin Brood Sauropod, a 5/4 for 5, which is especially useful if you're able to pump it, put it back on the top of your deck, and then we get a 6/5 for 5. So lots of value we get from that effect. Another great part of Time is health gain. So we have plenty of health gain options, and we have plenty of effects that happen when you gain health. So our card like Oasis Sanctuary, you gain 5 life for 3 power, which is pretty good.
So the one thing that I do want to add about life gain, though, is that most cases, I want to say 90% of the time, you're going to want your life gain to be incremental and in a bonus to something else. Just life gain by itself, unless you have it triggering other abilities, it sometimes doesn't affect the board state enough to make a difference. So now when you get it on a creature or in addition to another spell, then it really does pay off. It could essentially buy you another turn and stuff like that.
So yeah, with a unit like Disciplined Dominaria, 2/2 for 3, as you gain life, she gets +1/+1 each time. So she could ramp pretty easily.
Yeah, and definitely get out of hand.
Yeah. So another great effect in Time deck is Silence. Since Time doesn't really have a lot of useful removal options, this is really great when you're playing against decks with effects like Entomb. So you don't get that. Your enemy doesn't get the Entomb effect if you silence that unit before killing the unit. So that definitely gives you more options when it comes to playing against decks like Shadow deck, where so many of their cards have effects once you kill the unit.
All right. Sweet. Moving right along to Justice Green. And I will admit I had a little bit of bias to this initially because I played green a lot in Magic, which I still play Magic. So I kind of immediately gravitated to it, and the starter decks that they give you kind of worked with my playstyle. So I went ahead and jumped into that. The Justice has a few things. Starting off, one of the more interesting ones, if you can kind of make it happen, which I feel could be a little difficult and limited, is the ability-based synergy. So you have characters called the Unseen, or a tribe. Much like things like Tranquil Scholar, which is a 2/2 for 2, and when it enters or when you summon it, it generates a random skill for itself. This is flying, this is charge, this is lifesteal, and things like that. And then it takes that same skill it earned, and you could place it on one of your units in your hand. Now, the Unseen kind of capitalize on things like this. They have another one where if a unit attacks and it has more than 1 or 2 or more skills, then it gets a +1/+1 and stuff like that. So there is a synergy there based on things. You'll see a lot of units have something like, let's say, Flying and Aegis and things like that. And so I feel it is a little bit tougher because you're going to see a lot of these double skills on more cards similar to or in the uncommon range than you will the common. That being said, though, there's a common that gives you Warcry and Endurance. That counts. Things like that. So that's something to look at. Like I said, it's based primarily in the tribe of Unseen. Another great thing about Green or Justice is the Flyers. So they have a tribe of Valkyrie, which goes with the lore of Eternal. But pretty much, actually, I want to say every single Valkyrie flies because they get wings. And so it gives them an automatic evasion skill, which can prove to be quite difficult to battle against in limited. If your opponent decides that they wanted to go primarily on the ground for good creatures and value, or maybe just the colors they chose don't have a lot of flyers, your flyers, whether they are small or not, can essentially make it fly over your opponent's creatures or units and deal damage. Now, that being said, it's something to consider because flying is valued so highly, you are going to be paying a little bit more power for less stats on a creature. For example, where you might get a 3/3 for 3 is the standard, you will get a 2/2 flyer for 4 instead. But the evasion ends up paying itself off. So it's something to look at. That also stacks with various Valkyrie triggers like ally and stuff, where the more Valkyries you have, they kind of trigger bonuses on each other. Another sub theme for Justice is armor bonuses and weapons. So much like Red was earlier, or Fire, Justice focuses on weapons as well. And these weapons are both relic weapons, which you can equip on your character, or regular weapons that you can equip on your creatures or units. And they incentivize this by having things like, there's a common 4/4 that when it comes into play, it gives you 4 armor. What this does is it essentially makes it to where you can attack more times with your weapons, whether you have one or not, and at the very least, it's incremental life gain. The 4 armor can take additional hit that maybe your opponent wasn't planning on if you're racing and things like that. But if not, it also stacks on a weapon. If you get a relic weapon that, let's say, is a 3/3, so essentially you can hit one character with it before it goes away. If you have the additional 4 armor, now you can maybe hit 2 or 3 before the relic weapon wears out. Now, I say this because armor is the lifespan, so to speak, or durability of your weapon. As long as you have armor, the relic weapon will stay equipped. As soon as you get back to 0 armor and just your life total, then the weapon will be destroyed. One such creature that does stuff like this also is Bright Mace Paladin. It's a 3/3 for 3, which I already like in this format because I think it's a solid body, but it has the added bonus that anytime its power or attack is more than 4, it also gains lifesteal. So you can slap any kind of weapon on it and it automatically will, 1, get the bonus of the weapon, and then 2, it gives itself lifesteal, which can definitely swing a race around, especially on a solid body like that. Moving right along, like I said earlier, they focus on a lot of skills and things like that. So you're going to see things like Aegis, Empower, and Endurance in Justice. Aegis, it gives you a shield, both either to you or to your units, and it essentially negates 1 spell casted, whether it is a sweep or a board wipe or something like that that targets all units, or a specific kill spell. It eats it up 1 time. So if they say, let's say you have a 2/2 flying Valkyrie and they try to torch it, the torch will target it, it will deal 3 damage, and the 3 damage is negated by the Aegis. But now the creature will not have an Aegis and it'll be vulnerable. It also works for you for discard spells, for direct damage and things like that. Empower triggers every time you play a power spell, or a sigils, a power card, so to speak. So it could be the dual color ones, it could be the sigils, anything like that. Whether you do it once a turn or more than once a turn and stuff like that, because Justices have ways to cheat in extra power, it will trigger X ability. Sometimes it's giving a unit a +1/+1. Sometimes it is gaining life. Sometimes it's gaining armor. Every time you cast a power card, it will trigger that ability. And much like what Valkyrie was saying earlier with the life gain in time, green can definitely get out of hand like that once you get multiple triggers going. And last is Endurance. Endurance is pretty straightforward. All it means is your creature is not exhausted. So your unit can attack, and at the end of the turn, it will actually go back to being ready. So it could block, or it can activate, whatever pseudo ability it has, like the ultimate and things like that. This is something to take in consideration when it comes to stun and exhaust spells, because Endurance creature units cannot be exhausted. So it has that natural kind of protection against that. And last, of course, my high point of every color pair, or just every color period, is removal. So Justice has a decent amount of removal, but it's slightly conditional. What I mean by conditional is you're not just going to get something straightforward like deal X amount of damage or remove a unit. There's going to be certain criteria you have to meet for the removal spell to actually be effective. That being said, there are multiple ones, so you're not really dealing with the exact same kind of restriction. So having a variety of removal spells actually can make you quite versatile against your opponent and take out whatever threats, as long as you're kind of conservative about it. Primary one is like Vanquish. So for 2 power, you get a spell that can kill any unit that has attack 4 or greater, which honestly, you're getting a really good deal here, because in most cases limited, their bomb is going to have 4, 5, 6 attack, and being able to only spend 2 power to take that out essentially gives you the chance to do 2 spells that turn, which could be enough of a swing in the game to take it over. Another kind of removal spell they have where you have to destroy an attacking creature, or you can only destroy a creature with, power 5 or greater. So this is just stuff to consider. But once again, it kind of gives you removal spells for the units you really do want to get rid of, the really important ones. And yeah, that pretty much covers the basic knowledge of Justice. Val, do you want to go ahead and move on to Primal for us?
Sure. So a major component of Primal is flyers. They might actually have the most flying options of all the colors. All the flyers kind of work together in Primal, and especially when you get Cliffside Caretaker out, 2/4 for 5. It has Inspire, so the units you draw get flying. Inspire basically means like when you draw a card, you get an effect from that as long as it's in play. So that's definitely one you want to keep alive. Another great combo with flying is Windshaper. So Windshaper pumps flyers +1/+1, and when you have multiples of those out, you can get some really big flyers pretty quickly. Windshaper's also a 2/4 for 4. So I like running all of those in my deck if I can, and just pumping all of my flyers. Our next effect for Primal is card draw. So we have a lot of card draw options, which really actually works pretty well with the Inspire. So we have Second Sight, which is really straightforward. 2 power, draw 2 cards, and put a card from your hand on top of your deck. Really useful when you just, need to draw cards. We also have some effects from
The one thing to add on to that, though, is the fact that you're putting a card back on top of your library also synergizes really well with Echo.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Which we'll go into a little bit more when we talk about the color pairings. Cards like Psionic Savant, 1/1 for 5, seems not great when you look at it, but when you draw a card, Psionic Savant gets +1/+1. Sorry, guys. You might meet my cat in the future if you watch my streams. So this stacks really well, especially like when you have those multiple card draws, you just keep pumping this Psionic Savant over and over again. Next effect I really like in blue is Stun. So we have cards like Ice Sprite, which is, oh jeez, sorry, the cat is in the way. So, we have cards like Ice Sprite, which is 1/2 for 3. She's a flyer. On summoning, you stun an enemy unit, and it stays as long as you have Ice Sprite. So that's a great way to neutralize an enemy that you might not be able to take out directly. Another great card with stun is Gerald's Frostkin. He only has a one-time stun effect. It doesn't last as long as you have him, but it's a good way to neutralize an enemy, bringing him out, maybe get an attack in. Another aspect of Primal is Transform. So we have multiple options for transformation. We have Polymorph, which is a spell for 3. You transform a unit into a 1/1 frog. Basically a kill spell for like a huge creature. It's important to note that if a creature has weapons equipped, if they have some other permanent augmentation, Polymorph doesn't take care of that. So you'll get a frog with a weapon. So that's a good thing to remember. Maybe affect your choice on how you use polymorph. We also have changey stick. I'm not sure exactly how that one is pronounced, but it's a weapon. It's a +1/+1 for 2. If you use its spellcraft, so on casting, instead of paying 2, you can pay 6. Spellcraft, you play polymorph. So you get that same effect. You just also get a weapon in the deal. We also have cards like Rain of Frogs. You transform all of the cards of one type from an enemy's hand into 1/1 frogs with Destiny, so they just come out as soon as they're drawn. One more transform is Unstable Form. So this is a really interesting card. This also has Echo, so you draw 2. It only costs 1. You transform a unit into a random unit that costs 1 more. So you can transform one of your own units, or you can transform an enemy's unit. This is really helpful if you, for some reason, have a card that is neutralized in some way, but it's still on the board. Transforming it completely turns it into a new card. So gives you some options if you're at a stalemate. It also is useful if you have an enemy with a card that you have no response to. So say, okay, so the blue deck wouldn't have a problem with flyers, but say you don't have any flyers on the board, they have 5 flyers that are attacking with, you can transform one of their units into something else, anything else, hope that it's not a flyer, give it something that you can deal with. Another aspect of the primal deck is burn spells. So we have a spell like spells like Lightning Storm, which just across the board deals 2 damage to each unit. Important to note that this is also to your units, so it's more useful when they have a lot more units on the board than you do, or your units are higher in life and health. Yeah.
It's you can also play around it too, though. Like if you know it's in your hand and your opponent doesn't, you can kind of adjust the board state.
Definitely, yeah. I've waited out a few points of damage while my opponent builds up their board, and then just played this as a sweeper as I'm attacking or sacrificing. Really useful. We also have something. We also have Lightning Strike with it, which is a fast spell, deals 4 damage to an attacking enemy. So really nice surprise for your enemies when you pull that out. It only costs 2. One more burn spell we have is Violent Gust. This deals 5 damage to a unit with flying for 2, which I don't find as useful as the more general Lightning Storm and Lightning Strike, but definitely can come in handy in a pinch.
Right on. All right, this brings us down to our last color, which is Shadow or Purple. This color is very unintuitive to a lot of beginning players. Reason being is it's kind of one of those things where you get high value but at a cost. And a lot of intro players find it kind of difficult. They're like, why do I have to kill my own creatures? Or why do I have to take damage to myself? And things like that. But it ends up rewarding you for doing that, especially if you can kind of adjust your deck to the point where you're maximizing this. So the very basic foundation of it is sacrifice engines and synergies and stuff like that, which is one of the things, like I said, it takes a lot of time for intro players and even sometimes intermediate players to kind of overcome that hump because you feel like you're down a card. But when in reality, if you can create the certain key cards that you need or generate or draft them, etc., to kind of lessen the blow, it ends up being at a huge advantage to you and a disadvantage to your opponent. So one of the key cards I like to point out to for this is Slumbering Stone. And what it is for 1 power you get a 0/2 creature, which really doesn't do anything, kind of uneventful, but it has Entomb. So when it dies, you get to create a 2/2 flyer. What this means is when you're comboing off with other cards that require you to sacrifice a creature, whether it be a draw spell, another creature that pumps it, or you get effects, you're essentially not down a card at all. You actually upgraded. So you spent 1 power to get a 2/2 flyer. So you're up on that transaction. A good combo, another common that combos well with this is Ravenous Thornbeast. It's one of my favorite cards right now. Reason being is it's a 3/3 for 3, which you've already heard me explain. I think is quite. I mean, it's pretty medium. Don't get me wrong. It's not like a stellar card. You're not doing it if you get a bunch of 3/3 for 3. But I feel like it's a good set of stats in this format right now to both attack with or hold the board in case your opponent is the aggressor. Now, the Thornbeast has a summon ability. When you summon it and it comes into play, you have the ability, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, then it gets a +2/+2, becoming a 5/5 for 3 power, which is a great deal. So, in a perfect world, you play the Slumbering Stone on turn 1. You do something turn 2, maybe cast a stranger or another spell, and then on turn 3 you drop Ravenous Thornbeast, you sack the 0/2, and now you have a 5/5 Thornbeast and a 2/2 flyer. So you spent 4 power for a combined 7 stats, 2 of which is flying. It's things like that that really make the Shadow decks like kind of soar above your opponent, because you're just getting so much value as long as you generate both the engines that require things to be sacrificed as well as cards that reward you for sacrificing them.
And that's why I like Silence so much against Shadow decks.
Yeah, good point. One thing to consider as well is that you can silence the Entomb, but I think if the effect like the Thornbeast happens and you silence it, it'll just remain a 5/5. Whereas we're still learning that. The next thing is Graveyard Recursion. So because Shadow wants to throw things in the graveyard, whether it is milling itself, i.e. taking cards directly from the top of the library and putting them into the void, or i.e. sacrificing your units to go to the void, it has a bunch of cards that let you kind of interact with your void a little more than other colors. One basic card is Dark Return, which is a 1 power spell, and pretty straightforward. It lets you pull back any card from a creature or unit card from your graveyard back into your hand, and it gives it a +1/+1. It is a couple of things to note real quick about the game is that anything that happens to the creature or unit on it itself, not necessarily a weapon, but for example, the Thornbeast. If you make it a 5/5 and it goes to your void, it remains a 5/5. So if you pull it back from the void with your Dark Return, then you'll have a 6/6 for 3 power.
I think that actually that has the same effect with weapons too. You keep your weapon.
Okay.
We need to verify that, but I'm pretty sure that
the weapon comes off.
It does?
Yeah. If you die, you drop the weapon, so you don't get to pick it back up.
Okay.
But it can really you can really maximize the value on your deck if you combo Dark Return and other recursion spells with creatures that are units that haven't entered the battlefield effect or a summon effect. So let's say, for example, you have a unit that says when you summon this card, the opponent loses a creature, or they have to sacrifice a creature. You play that creature, they lose a card, and then let's say they happen to kill it, you can Dark Return it back and cast it again, essentially getting up a card yet again, as well as a stronger creature or unit. So it's really, really valuable. There's various cards that capitalize on this and maximize on this, as well as creatures that have interactions from the void. So keep that in mind. You'll see a lot of that in Shadow. Next is card draw. So I lightly touched on it earlier, where there is card draw in Shadow, but once again at a price. There are spells that require you to maybe sacrifice a creature or do something, or sacrifice units. Sorry, I'll eventually make the switch to unit, and you get to draw cards. One of them is a fast spell, so it actually kind of acts as pseudo counter removal, if you will, where if an opponent tries to destroy one of your units, you can sack it in response and draw 2 cards. So that's something, but once again, you're losing your creature. There is where you're maximizing on the sack effect and being like, well, I was going to lose the unit anyway, so I might as well kind of get what I can out of it. Another aspect of the gameplay is Nightfall. So certain units, spells, and weapons have Nightfall attached to them. So when you play them, they summon Nightfall. Which this means is it will activate certain spells and activate abilities of units that are in play, but when you pass the turn, it would be Nightfall. So your opponent will draw 2 cards, but take 1 damage at the price of that card. Then when they pass the turn back to you, it's still night time for you. You'll draw 2 cards, or draw an additional card at the cost of 1 life. All right, and then once you pass the turn a second time, it'll go back to Nightfall will no longer be in effect unless you did something. So you're paying a price of 1 damage as well as giving your opponent an additional card, but you're hoping to stack your deck in a way where you are the one that's really capitalizing on the extra card draw for whatever reason. So that's something that you'll find very common in a lot of the spells. And it's something to keep in mind because sometimes you may not want to give your opponent that extra card if they are top decking and you have the more advantageous board. All right. A really light point I don't want to get too heavy into is Wisp synergies, which you'll see. This combos off a lot with time, so I'm not going to get too much in depth because that's more of a combo pair. But there are cards where Wisp matters. So it is a unit type, and it's one of those things where you can give a Wisp an ability, or if you own a Wisp, it gives another card an ability. So that's something to look forward to. Once again, more so when you're pairing it with different colors. Last, my favorite point again is removal, and let me just say Shadow is the removal king. Shadow essentially takes a little bit, it's the best kind of removal, and I'll tell you why. It has the most solid removal package where the majority of their removal spells just straight up say destroy or kill a creature or kill a unit. Okay, mainly the rarity of a card, i.e. whether it's common, uncommon, or rare, is going to dictate the price or power you pay to have that spell happen or to kill a creature unit, but they all do it straight up. Doesn't matter if it's a 1/1 or a 10/10, it will just straight up kill a unit. And we're talking about things like Death Strike and Cut Ties, where it's essentially the same spell, just the amount of power you have to invest or the speed of it, whether it's a fast spell or a regular spell. There's also other spells that slightly kind of matter where, okay, you have to do a -1/-1 based on your Shadow influence, or a -1/-1 based on how many units you have in your void. But overall, Shadow has the most amount of removal, so it's definitely something to consider. A lot of it is also splashable. What I mean is it only requires influence of one Shadow to play it. So you have the ability of maybe having Shadow be a lesser color in your deck and still be able to have that removal package with it. So it's something really valuable. I think it ups the amount of value that Purple or Shadow has to any kind of limited deck, because once again, I value being able to take care of having answers to your opponent's threats very highly. And sometimes it can make the difference if your opponent is kind of going all in on 1 or 2 rares that they hope will win them the game. As soon as you get rid of it, you're in much better shape, especially if you're able to kind of incrementally value them out of the game through your earlier plays and stuff like that. But yeah, that sums up Shadow, and with that is all 5 primary colors of Eternal. Not too bad of a rundown. Once again, this is very initial. Just kind of get your feet wet on what things are going to do. As we go into more color pairings, things get a little more intricate and higher synergies start to kind of assemble because you have the overlap in colors. Is there anything you want to add to that, Valkyrie?
No. Yeah, just we're going to definitely have a lot more to add once we get into the pairings. There are definitely some colors that complement each other very well.
Yeah, definitely. So another thing that you heard us mention throughout the show is value and synergies and, difference between fast spells and things like that, which we are planning on having a show that does discuss mechanics and strategies of gameplay and timing a lot more in depth. But once again, we're going to have our own show for that. So
talk about all of the mistakes I've made in the past and what I've learned from them.
Yes. We will definitely have some learn from your mistake kind of shows and things like that. Definitely tune into our streams, which Val can go ahead and break it down for us.
So on Twitter, Patreon, and YouTube, we are EJ the Podcast. You can just search for that username and we will come up. On Twitch, we have individual accounts. I am Valkyrie EJ, and Jedi is Jedi_EJ. So find us, check us out, follow us, friend us.
Yeah, Twitter is going to be a really good point to stay in contact with us. We will post on there anytime we throw up a new podcast, or if we're going to stream, typically within an hour, we'll post it on Twitter. And that's going to be a good place to get back at us if you have any questions and things like that. That being said, let us know what color pairs are your favorites and see what synergy and why. So go ahead and post that once again to EJ the Podcast on Twitter. and expect to see other things. You can definitely check out our streams. That's where we do talk through all our plays and things like that. You see us incorporating the knowledge we've gathered and what we're going to share with you on the show in live gameplay, and hopefully it will help you improve yours. Lastly, we want to give a shout out to Limited Resources. Thank you so much for being the inspiration for this show, and they are the basis for a lot of the theories and strategies we'll be discussing throughout the course of this show. So give credit where credit's due. And that's pretty much all I got. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us on Eternal Journey. This is Valkyrie and Jedi. See you next time.